Okay, hello everybody, good afternoon and welcome to Penguin Island here at Birdworld. My name's Ellie, I'm also joined this afternoon by Natalie. We are both keepers here at Birdworld, but we are also joined this afternoon by our very special guests, our penguin feeders this afternoon, Ty and Trey. It's actually Trey's 9th birthday today, so we're all wishing him a big happy birthday here from Birdworld. So Natalie and the boys are going to be feeding the penguins up at the front, and I'm just going to be telling you a little bit more about them. So these here are Humboldt Penguins. They're one of the 2 species of penguin that we have here at Birdworld. Our others you may have seen today are our African penguins over at Penguin Beach, but these guys are the Humboldt and they're from South America, specifically around areas of Chile and Peru. So they're one of 17 species of penguin, and all of these species range in various ways, such as their sizes, their coloration, their markings, and also the depths at which they can dive to underwater. One thing that they all have in common, however, is that they're all found in the southern hemisphere below the equator. So a lot of the time people might think of penguins and they'll picture them as living in icy and cold conditions. And although this is sometimes the case, you can actually also find species of penguin in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa and of course South America, like the Humboldt here. So the Humboldt penguins actually live on the edge of one of the world's hottest and driest deserts. So temperatures on land can actually get really, really hot for them. But on the other hand, the waters that they swim in are affected by a freezing cold current that comes in from Antarctica. And this is called the Humboldt current, so hence where they get their name. So to cope with those really freezing waters that they're swimming in, they use their 2 layers of feathers to keep themselves nice and warm. They have an underneath layer of feathers, which is made up of soft and fluffy down feathers, and then overlapping that is a completely different set of feathers. Now these feathers are really, really tiny and almost needle-like in their structure. And what they do is they'll overlap one another, and what that does is it insulates the penguin to keep them nice and warm, and it also keeps them nice and waterproof, so that when they come out from the water from swimming, all of those underneath layers of feathers stay nice and dry and keeps them lovely and warm. So on the other hand, to keep themselves nice and cool when they're on the really hot land, you might notice that they have some fair patches of skin around the eyes. Now, much like you and me on a very hot day, much like today, we might get a little bit toasty, a little bit too overheated, and we might flush a little bit pink. Now, it's exactly the same for these guys. If they get a little bit too toasty, they're going to be flushing pink, and what that is them actually losing their heat through these bare patches of skin. Now, all of our penguins here do actually have names, but as you can see, they all look pretty much identical. It's really hard to tell who is who. One distinguishing feature between these penguins, however, are the spots on their tummy. So if you look at all of our penguins, some of them have got only a few spots, some of them have got quite a lot of spots. And this is actually called a spot pattern, and it's actually completely unique to every single penguin. It's kind of like their equivalent of a human fingerprint. It doesn't matter how many times the penguin is going to molt during its lifetime, it's always going to keep the exact same spot pattern. So in theory, we'd be able to look at these spot patterns and see which penguin is which. But in practice, it's actually really, really tricky. So instead, we cheat a little bit, and they've all got coloured wing bands on, and they're all also microchipped, exactly like you would for your cat or your dog. So in this way, instead, we can really easily identify each individual penguin. So this afternoon they're being fed sprats. This is one of their favourites, but they'll also eat a whole host of other things out in the wild, including sardines, anchovies, squid, also crustaceans and sometimes even jellyfish. Now you may notice from the penguins, especially these lazy few at the front who aren't doing any swimming, when they catch their fish in their beaks they're always swivelling it round and they're swallowing their fish head first. Now, a lot of fish-eating birds will actually do this, because if they swallow their fish tail first, all of the spines and the scales on that fish can actually get pushed in the wrong direction and potentially get lodged in the bird's throat. So it's quite a clever little trick that they've learned. If they swallow their fish head first, it's always going to go down much more comfortably for them. They also have very hard and sharp serrated beaks and spiny-like structures that go through the mouth and down the throat, and what that does is it really helps them to grasp onto that fish. Now, there are also 3 kinds of swimming that you can look out for from our penguins today. The first is known as surface swimming, and we're giving a lovely example of that at the front at the moment. Now, this is a fairly restful form of movement where the penguin's simply bobbing along the surface of the water. Now, this is really useful for them out in the wild, because obviously out there they're not going to have people feeding them from a bucket. They're actually going to have to be going out there and finding finding their own food source. So what they're going to be doing while they're swimming like this is they're actually going to be keeping an eye out for where other seabirds are diving for fish. And this helps them to really easily locate a good area for finding food themselves. Once they've located a good area to find food, they will use a form of swimming known as underwater flying. And this is named so because it uses the exact same movement as flight. Their torpedo-shaped bodies help to streamline them through the water, and they'll keep their feet and legs fairly still while swimming like this. And what that does is it acts as a kind of rudder, really, just to help steer themselves through the water. Now, the last form of swimming, and the fastest form of movement for a penguin, is known as porpoising. And this is where the penguin will skim really quickly across the surface of the water and leap in and out of that surface, much like a dolphin or a porpoise would. Now, this is super useful for them out in the wild for their really long fishing trips, because there's not much resistance near the surface of the water, so the penguin can save its energy and therefore swim for a much longer amount of time. It's also really useful in the case of being followed by any predators, because if they're leaping in and out of the surface, it's going to be much harder for a predator to keep track of them. Now, this is a great way that they can evade their predators, but their number one priority is just not to be spotted in the first place. So it may not look like it in this lovely blue pool where you can see all of our penguins nice and clearly, but these penguins actually have a really effective form of camouflage, and this is known as countershading. So if you think about it, if a predator is swimming along in the ocean, swimming above the penguin, they're going to look down and see the black back of the penguin, and that's just going to blend in with the dark ocean floor beneath. Likewise, if a predator is swimming underneath the penguin, they're going to be looking up and seeing the white front of the penguin, and that's just going to be blending in with the light coming in from the ocean surface. So although it doesn't seem like it at first glance, they do actually have a really effective form of camouflage. Now, unfortunately, these guys aren't doing very well at all out in the wild at the moment. They are currently classed as vulnerable, and one of the really big contributors to the decline in population is something called guano mining. Now, if you don't know what guano is, it's basically a really fancy word for saying poo. So in this case, Humboldt penguin poo. So a few years ago, we realised that their guano was a super effective fertiliser. So we scraped it all off the rocks and we took it home for ourselves. Now, you may not think this is such a big deal, as guano is a waste product for the penguins, but these guys actually like to nest in their own guano. It sets as a very hard and thick substance. It's an absolute nightmare to clean, but it's absolutely perfect for them because they can create a nice thick layer of it and then create a scrap in which to lay their eggs. And what this does is it protects the eggs from predators and from the wind and the rain and anything that could potentially cause damage to those eggs. So obviously when we took all of that away, it left their eggs really vulnerable, and because of that, their population numbers did really suffer. The good news is, though, is that guano mining is now illegal, and all Humboldt penguin nesting sites are now protected. So although that is fantastic news, there are still other threats that they're facing out there in the wild. Another really big one for these guys is competition with us for food. We like to eat a lot of the same fish as these guys do, which has led to overfishing and really depleted the food stocks that they did originally have. So there are a few things that we could do to help these guys out in the wild. One of the things that we can do is we can think about where we source our fish and make sure it's responsibly and sustainably sourced. Another thing that we could do is exactly what we're doing here. We can keep them in captivity like this. So if we keep a lovely healthy group of captive penguins, then hopefully one day in the future, when those situations out in the wild are a bit better managed, maybe these guys' grandchildren or even their children can actually be re-released out into the wild. So these guys in essence are acting as a bit of a safety net really, so that we can ensure that this species is still around for future generations. Now that's almost about it from me, but I will just mention these two other birds that we have here in Penguin Island that definitely are not penguins. And we've got a little moorhen here down on my right and a wild grey heron on the left. Now these aren't our birds, they're completely wild, but they're just very clever, and they've clocked on to when we feed our fish-eating birds. They do exactly the same with the pelicans, and they're always just guaranteed to swoop in and get a bit of easy food for themselves. So that's about it from me, but as for the rest of the day, the next talk is going to be the owls. That's at 4 o'clock, and that's at the Terry Pratchett Owl Parliament at the far end of the park. So if you're interested in owls, I'd recommend going along and having a listen to that. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening. I really hope you enjoy the rest of your day here at Birdworld. And before we go, can we all just give Ty and Trey a really big round of applause for a great job at feeding our penguins.
okay, girls and boys? Be careful how you get down.